Well, thanks very much to everyone for coming along today. It's great to see so many faces here as part of Dublin Gallery Weekend. I'm sitting here with Richard Proffitt, a wonderful artist who works across installation, sculpture, drawing, painting, music. Richard has shown recently in the dock, in visual, in Ava in Limerick, but I discovered actually during the week that one of your first shows in Dublin was in Tower Records. Was that right?
There was a piece in, it was installed under Dawson Street. Yeah.
It's a long time ago. How long was, when was that?
It was 2016 maybe.
2016.
So it was, I was making an album cover.
Okay.
For myself, and I had a load of objects, and there's a basement under Tower Records, which is underneath Dawson Street, and it's, I don't know, it must go back centuries, the actual building.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like it was totally blacked out. So, but there was power sockets in there, so you could kind of illuminate it.
Sort of see one of the various, types of show that you do, because your shows are always typed, they're always sort of boundless or organic. I thought we'd start the talk today with, Richard has written a text to accompany the show, and I haven't seen that recently, so I thought I'd read it and then we could sort of kick off from there. The text reads, "It was hot that summer, rays of sunshine reflected off shattered glass, Primasic shards, crayon colors, rainbows, bubblegum ice pops, electric blue liquid, chewed plastic tube, torn, bent, bitten, dribbling 99, Yankee Doodle chime ringing out, hot smoke, stuttering speech, blades of cut grass, sticky hands, scared dog, alleyway, kicked in hoarding, streams of sweat snaking my spine, grazed knees on gravel, furry cigarette filters, slow down and breathe, look towards the sky to see a breeze cuts through the trees, the monotonic moans of the motorway, eyes stuck to the pavement, a broken necklace, crumbled and scattered, a moment, clouds shift, the church bell tolls, thunderclap, an egg in the molten tarmac. This was also the world. That, I know in conversations that we've had recently, that text is the sort of memory of a real thing, of a real event.
Yeah. So
when was that? Where was that?
It's like I guess part of my practice that we haven't talked about just yet is that a lot of it comes from kind of making like pieces of writing as well that try in some way, I guess it's some sort of like, it's like a kind of therapy or something. It's like a trying to recollect certain memories of predominantly childhood and adolescence.
Okay.
And so that collection of words and sentences is one of those. So it's based on a real memory of seeing an egg in the middle of the road.
And the egg is part of the title,
in
isn't it, of the show?
Yeah. So it's just one of those occurrences in life that I'm always interested in, where it's something that's like out of the ordinary, but like exists within
a quotidian environment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds like a summer day.
Yeah, so it would have been like summer holidays.
Okay.
So in that piece of writing, I'm perhaps about 7 or 8 years old, maybe. Yeah, and I guess the meaning or the purpose of the text is me trying to understand or come to terms with where my understanding of landscape comes from, and the idea of the imagery of landscapes.
Okay.
or places, you know?
And when we talk about imagery and places and landscape, we're surrounded by them today. There's a boundlessness to the sort of paintings. It doesn't seem that the paintings want to stay simply landscapes.
Yeah, so I guess you used landscapes as a broad term for describing them.
Yeah.
When really there's something perhaps more psychological going on in a lot of the paintings where, you know, imagery from landscapes or places is piled on top of other images. So it's, you know, it's like...
There's a porousness to the paintings, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's a sort of coming and going. There's a here and now to the paintings.
Yeah. And there's also, you know, there's an element of, there's a haphazardness to the paintings as well, or there's a kind of, I guess it's sort of an experimental approach. So I never know really what I'm gonna paint before I paint it a lot of the time. So a lot of it's just a reaction to the...
There's no drawings or anything at the start in the studio practice?
Very rarely. Sometimes, you know. I mean, there's recurring themes in some of the paintings, you know, like boats or, you know, suns, horizons.
Birthday cakes?
Yeah, birthday cakes. But the... yeah, so like a lot of it is to do with like this reaction to the surface or the paint. So sometimes you'll throw a load of paint down on it and it may suggest, or it may fall in a way that suggests that a certain image or a symbol or a motif will then be drawn into it, you know?
So this sunny summer day, finding a yoke on a tarmac, was it then or around then that you decided that you were an artist or that you realized you were an artist? Or was it later? Was it when you started going to college?
It was probably later. It was probably like, you know, I like most people always enjoyed, you know, doing paintings at the kitchen table or whatever when I was a kid. But yeah, it was probably later in life. It was probably like maybe like 14, 15. Whenever I went to first exhibition, you know.
In Liverpool?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's always this thing that, you know, you make something and you want to show it to your parents or to, you know, your teacher. You want there's an approval that comes from that. Or there's the want to show what you've done, you know. So you've put something into the world and you want people to see it. And I think that begins in childhood, you know.
Yeah.
And if you then, you know, receive something back from that exchange, then
that validation.
I think that's like it's like a it's a very early moment of being an artist, I think.
Okay, and it's around then. So you decide to apply to college, and you go to college in.
Went to undergraduate in Salford.
Okay.
And postgraduate Manchester School of Art.
And in Manchester, were you looking? Was your practice? Was it more about? Was it discreetly sort of bounded into sort of categories like landscape or sculpture or drawing, or was it at that stage were you involved as wholly as you are in all of these disciplines?
During undergraduate study, I would have been making a lot of like that. I guess they were somewhere in between abstract and landscape kind of paintings, but and they were, you know, they were usually painted with like gloss paint and oil paint on MDF. And then they were often accompanied by sound installations. So at that point, you know, there was a thing going on where I wanted it to be an environment.
Okay.
You know? But then I kind of left painting behind when I got more interested in objects. And that's why I went to do an MA straight after, because I knew that I wasn't ready, because I'd only just got interested in a totally different medium.
It took the undergraduate to figure out what you were sort of more focused on.
Pretty much, yeah. And then I focused like pretty much purely on objects and scraps of things for my MA, and then began to collect objects with a more like considered thematic in mind.
And what was the MA show like? What did you do for that? Can you remember?
We showed like two kind of like found pieces of wood that were made into kind of like a totem-like structure with sheep skulls and fairy lights.
Okay.
They were perhaps a lot less confident or accomplished to what I make now.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, there were those, and there were, you know, I used to use nail varnish to paint the skulls. There was this kind of like makeshift taxidermy going on, you know?
Yeah.
Like I kind of stuffed the skulls with insulation wool and then paint them like, you know, bright colours of nail varnish.
And was there a show where you showed the studio?
Yeah.
And that was the same show.
We did a show as part of our postgraduate where we put it on ourselves, and I just emptied my studio of everything, really.
Because there's a sort of boundlessness to that, isn't there? There's a sort of, there's a sort of suspicion of boundaries, or that something you might, that you would be, that you like the work to spill over, in a way.
Yeah.
And that it spills into installation, it spills into drawing and into music.
Yeah. So it took a while before music became because I was always making music alongside doing art.
Yeah, as a parallel.
But I always saw them as, mostly as like very separate things. But it took a time before I realized that the way I make music was the exact same way that I was making art,
Which is intuitively, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like collect and record everything and then collage it or cut and paste it together.
There's an improvisatory.
So then there's I guess you go back to that idea of like something being boundless. It manifests in the music as well. Okay.
And there is this intuition, I think, in the practice. It's not a practice. There's a improvisatory nature to it, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
And that's expressed through the collections and through the installations.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would describe most of my practice as improvisatory.
Okay.
I never learned how to do, I'm always one of those people that kind of avoids how to learn.
How to do things. Yeah. I think you said, well, we were talking once and you said you don't like to see your hand.
Yeah.
So there's this idea that you have that you don't like to see your hand in the work.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the work is quite characterful.
Mm.
That there's a personality in the work.
Yeah.
Which is always, I think, a sign of a good artist,
Well, I think there's obviously this thing where I make installation work that's always, a lot of the time it's evocative of a habitat or a place that has been built by somebody else. And obviously there's this there's also the idea that the visitors go into a gallery and they're going to see this, so they know that it's art, but there's always this kind of fictitious narrative under all of that,
Yeah.
And part of that idea of not wanting to see your own hand in something comes from the fact that I, mostly make work that isn't painting, and painting a lot of the time requires the artist's own hand to make it. So it was this, for example, this series of paintings comes from that idea of perhaps not imagining that they're made by somebody else, but there's a kind of communal aspect to the work that it comes from the same place, but is perhaps I don't know, that it's maybe made by a collective rather than one person in a lot of ways. That's what my thinking was behind the making of that work.
And this work was shown, this work is part of a much bigger work, isn't it? That was shown in Eva in Limerick.
Yeah, so it was originally shown as a full 9-meter wide wall, 3 meters high, 9 meters wide. It's like 75 of those paintings, and then maybe another 20, 30 paintings that were on other surfaces.
On other supports. I'm interested in the way that you think, that you say that you want them to be a sort of, you want them to appear as part of a collective.
Mm-hmm.
You know, coming out of a kitchen, if you like, you know, where everybody contributes to the making of what. And why is it that you want people to experience?
I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if it comes from, like, you know, doing painting as something that has come to me later on as an artist.
Okay.
And, you know, me being personally aware of myself as an artist and what I, you know, make in terms of the installation work, and then going to make painting. It was like, I guess it's sort of a bridge for me personally.
Oh, yeah, okay.
To, I don't know, rationalize that or something, or, you know, to solidify it for myself within my great wider practice, you know. Yeah, that's what I would say. That's about,
I think
for me.
There's a sort of a deliberate attempt, I think, that in your practice that to make exhibitions and installations and paintings that appear, I think, to be between what is made and what is found.
Yeah.
There is that sort of blurring going on.
Yeah.
You know, and we see it in this show, even with the supports on these you know, these paintings, which are often found pieces of plywood, pieces that you might find, you know, at the back of something,
Yeah.
you know, left behind.
Yeah.
Elements of being left behind. Is that something that is that something that you think about consciously when you go to make works?
Yeah, that would be
like a reclamation?
That would be a big part of it, yeah. But particularly in this show with the paintings that are on, you know, scavenged or found pieces of plywood.
Do you then cut them up to a size that you think is specific, or do you deal with them actually as they are?
Very rarely.
Okay.
I would usually just use it as it is.
Yeah.
Or if I was to cut it, then I would just kind of cut it very quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
So they're not always, you know, they're seldom straight, you know, or square. So yeah, the three bigger paintings in this show, they're all on the sheets of plywood as I acquired
As you
them.
found them.
Yeah.
There's a sort of exploratory aspect to the, you know, to right at the beginning of the process that you're going out into the world and you know, it's a sort of journey, if you like.
Yeah.
And the paintings then, when they're finished, function as this sort of portal as well, don't they? As a way into something.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, quite often, yeah. I guess particularly the very warped bow painting over there, where the nature of the surface has determined the composition of the painting, in that it kind of bends it inward, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it takes you down this waterway or this alleyway through lights.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's this place that we're trying to get to through these paintings. Where do you think, you know, is that then the improvisatory types of landscapes or environments, or I know, you know, the types of mood that you really create when you go about making your, you know, for instance, the show in the dock or the show in visual were very atmospheric environments.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always a conscious attempt to make an escape somewhere that's
or a refuge,
not
maybe.
necessarily physical, you know.
Yeah.
It's a state of mind, I suppose, in some ways. You know, it's an escape from existence.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, just the constant technological onslaughts that we sort of have to put up with all the time.
And, you know, advertising. Work,
notifications,
work-life balance, pressure, that, you know, the whole thing.
the environments that you make, obviously in this show, you've decided that that you were going to look purely at painting. And I wonder how that decision came about.
To just show paintings.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's practical things at play as well, and
Sure.
the fact that I'd done 2 large installation works already
This year. Yeah.
and that I was slightly burnt out. But it's also that the making of those installation works only really happens when the opportunity arises. Like it's not like you can be sat in your studio making installation works.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable as a day-to-day practice, I mean, you could be building little components or whatever, but like the way I build them, the collection of objects, they quite often just sit there.
Yeah, waiting to be
years,
waiting for
until the opportunity arises to create something with them. So in terms of like an art practice, that's not very fulfilling, So like paint, like 9 times out of 10, I'm in the studio, I'm just making paintings or drawings, because it's this, it's a very physical and pleasing activity for me to do. So, I mean, if you're just doing that, like most painters, you end up with, 10, 20, 30, 40 paintings that you want to show, and then it was just to introduce more of a challenge, because the installation works for a period of time at least became too easy to make. So
you got into a manner of making them, if you like. Yeah, okay.
Like where it's second nature,
Yeah.
Your brain is trained itself how to relate to certain types of object, and you're just making them, without really thinking.
Yeah.
So going back to painting and then wanting to do a painting show is to, it's partly to give yourself a bit of a challenge, and and to kind of force yourself to be confident in the paintings that you're making.
Yeah.
In that they don't need to be augmented by something else, or there doesn't need to be another distraction
or reason for them to exist. Because I always felt that the paintings were like the things that the things that had been salvaged almost, when the people, whoever, I imagine these installations are made, as you say, by a collective almost, or that's a feeling that you get, that they're salvaged and rickety and rescued from moments, and that the paintings were part of that as well, or made during this period of refuge, or...
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it just took me a while before I got to a stage with the paintings where I was comfortable or confident in that they did evoke the same feeling as a lot of the other work that I make,
Yeah.
And that took a long time, like 4 or 5 years or something.
Yeah. So there's a connection then between the paintings, isn't there? Obvious. Between the landscapes of the paintings and the installations, in that they're refuges they're places of rest, or they're lost as well. There's a great deal of sense of that you can get lost in the paintings, and that they're paintings really of lost places as well.
Yeah, I think most of the paintings are of, like I very rarely would paint an interior. Which is perhaps odd, because I mostly make interiors.
Yeah. And interiors, we think of places as rest and solace, and
so I don't know. It's fulfilling for me to be able to do both, but in different mediums.
I didn't get a list, or I should have got a list, but there's the titles of each of the paintings. When you read them, you can read them in this mood that they become sort of songs or music or lyrics, maybe, rather than songs, snatches of song.
Yeah.
And I want to ask about, do you think the music becomes, do you listen to a lot of music? Thanks, Lana. Do you think the music becomes part of the paint? Does it help you when you're making the paintings? Does it become part of the paintings? Does it give you an energy, do you think, that transmits to the work?
Yeah, like, so like I listen to music all the time, when
Constantly
I'm
in
not
the
doing
studio?
something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I always have to have music on. So, yeah, I guess like I would often pick a particular type of music to listen to if I had something in mind,
Oh yeah. For its like,
Yeah.
for its vibe, for its tone.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, because the music would affect the whole atmosphere of the studio.
Okay.
So, and then therefore affect the painting as well, But yeah, like, so like the two paintings on the back wall over there, they would have been painted while listening to, I think I was listening to a psychedelic band called Sunburned Hand of the Man while painting them. I just had a mix on of their music. It was like a 4-hour mix.
Okay.
Yeah.
And psychedelia is something that we can see that anybody that pays attention to your practice knows or thinks about or can recognize psychedelia. And psychedelia was a sort of, it was such an optimism. There was such a sort of optimism there in the 60s, which, sort of turned or was quickly captured, I think.
Yeah.
And I know that you think maybe that's a good thing because it becomes more mainstream. Is that, what's that relationship there, do you think?
Yeah, I guess like the commercialization of it, I spoke a lot about before, in that it's not necessarily that much of a bad thing. Because it opens up as many people's minds to an alternative way of thinking or, being, But the thing about psychedelia, I find it fascinating that, the majority of people, at least in the Western world, would not have been able to experience the world in that way before that, particular epoch.
And these two paintings on the back wall, where did you showed these in as part of the doc?
Yeah.
And how did they function there? Because I know that they were outside the they weren't in the gallery, which is sort of, what happened there?
Well, I guess it's going back to that thing of talking about them being a product of the environment in terms of the installation. So that's the way they were shown there. They were shown as these like outside of the environment that they're perhaps a part of, Yeah, I don't want to say that they are, but it's always, a perhaps.
Yeah. They're perhaps, we think of paintings as traditionally being shown in galleries, so it's a sort of trip, if you like.
Yeah.
Before it sets you up for what's going to happen in the space.
Yeah, that's the way I wanted them to function. Yeah, is that they're an introduction, I suppose, of some sort.
And we've talked about sort of intuition and improvisation, these processes that go into the making of the paintings as well. But at the same time, I think there's a sort of, it's hard to describe, but nonetheless, there's a very real sense of composition to the works. And and you paint wet on wet, don't you?
Yeah.
So how do you control that, or how do you make your way through the paint? How do you make that balance work between sort of control and letting the paint do its thing?
It's just through a period of learning, really. It's a period, like, it's experimenting with the, with the mediums. It doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
That's part of the joy, I suppose. It's a bit like, I guess in some ways it's more noticeable in a series of like works on paper that aren't in here at the moment, but there's a kind of relationship to like, darkroom photography where you're waiting for something to
emerge.
Yeah. like that, like a lot of the time, you know. But like, it's just about getting used to the materials, though, you know. Like I use spray paint a lot because it dries really fast,
Yeah, okay. So it's,
you know.
so when you mentioned photography there, do you use photography as a source in the way that a lot of painters would use, or scraps of photographs or old photographs?
No, I mean, only very infrequently. If I have an idea, if something comes into my head that I want to paint, and I'm like, you know, what does that look like? You know,
Yeah, yeah,
I can't picture it. But no, I wouldn't really. I wouldn't never really paint from photographs or.
Is it too restrictive, or is it too prescriptive, the image in the photograph for you, or is it?
It's more that I just don't really get anything from it.
Okay.
Personally,
Okay.
like it doesn't do anything for me
Okay.
to be able to, you know, to copy a composition that's already, you know, it already exists.
Yeah.
Like I would look at a lot of photographs and stuff to, you know, but not necessarily while I'm in the studio, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
images that get lodged in your brain, and you know, you'll think, oh, you know,
Yeah.
that picture of a boat I saw the other day, or you know, picture of a cottage or something. You know, but I very rarely paint from it directly.
I'm just conscious of the time. It's 1:30 now. I suppose it'd be a good time to open it up to the audience. If there's any questions, I see one. Jem, isn't it?
Yeah, Jim, hi, Richard.
Hi.
And John. Your work is not really overworked, so I was wondering, do you discard a lot? Is that your way of editing? So would you, if something's not working out, would you just discard it and start again? You know, the way some people just keep reworking the same painting?
Yeah, so like all of the paintings would be made in like one sitting. So if it's not finished on the day that I start it, then I don't go back to it. So that's part of like my own impatience, or like this, you know, the like I tend to work really quickly, and I don't know, I just come around to the fact that I just settle on something being finished, you know. But there is a intentional decision made by me for things to look slightly unfinished or weathered, or you know, as if they were perhaps more finished than they are now, you know. But I'm that's really part of my whole practice, is like, I guess, this idea of like time and decay and transience, and yeah.
And I kind of sometimes feel like it's like, you know, if you work fast, if you're trying to outrun yourself before you get too logical, would that come into it a bit? Before you start applying too much questioning and logic to it?
Yeah, I would say that I try and avoid that. Yeah, but there's just a genuine, like, you know, there's a, like, I guess it's a bit like some sort of quest or something when you start a painting, and the way, like as I was saying, the way I start them, I don't really know what I'm painting, but then that, you know, midway through it becomes apparent what you want to paint. And it's just about getting to that point, and it's when I get to that point that it finished. But yeah, there would be like a very, like I would be very impatient with that. Like I'd want to get to that finishing point as quickly as possible, and then let it settle, and then start something else.
There's a thing as well, it's interesting that you talked about unfinishedness there generally, and I think it's to do with the nature of painting. You know, painting is not story or narrative in the sense that story and narrative demand or have use of an ending. You know, paintings are ongoing constantly. They're sort of constant.
Yeah.
Forever, if you like.
Yeah, they can reflect many moods, or, you know, people can see or imagine different things. constantly. But I mean, I guess some literature does function in that way as well. But yeah, I think more so it's more about the kind of very physical form of flux that I'm interested in art. In that, you know, some of these paintings may deteriorate over time, and for me that's kind of part of it, you know.
Yeah.
So there was a big to and fro going on with that in these works. Like these are trapped now, you know.
Yeah, so they're yeah, which is sort of, it's tough for them, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and also it's tough for them to be in a gallery, I'd say, because they're on, you know, it's exhibitionary in nature.
Yeah.
You know, they don't get to be,
There was
you know,
part
they
of
have
that-
to pay they have to pay attention, if you like.
I mean, I don't want to like pretend that wasn't part of it, you
Yeah.
know, that it's a commercial gallery that I'm showing in, and those paintings are framed, which means something within that context. But the original decision to get them framed was because they were shown in Eva as the block, on which I wanted it to be seen that they were these very quickly done, rough, you know, uncared for paintings. That
Collected on the
that were
road
shown
almost.
not like paintings, they were shown like objects, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And it was only after having them away in storage for a while, that I went through them again and was like, oh, you know, hang on a minute, there's something else you can do with these now, you know?
Yeah.
That you can trap them, and then the age and the history and the damage to them is then trapped and more visible for the viewer, you know? Perhaps even, you know, that nature of them being these very uncared for paintings is even more visible when they're trapped in a frame, and you can see all the edges and the...
As they were in Limerick, they were quite, you know, it was a huge installation, wasn't a very tall installation. And there was so much to look at that to focus, if you like, was almost not the point.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It was almost, it was unfathomable, I suppose, for the eye.
Like to pick up on a detail was to perhaps lose the event, if you like.
Yeah. And that was something that I only kind of realized after I'd made the work, you know?
Yeah.
Because I kind of tend to look at things in a very minute way, you know? Like I tend to focus in heavily on tiny details, particularly in like the installation works of hundreds of objects, you know? I'll focus in, you know, on something that, you know, may seem ridiculous, you know?
And
like
might be invisible almost.
Yeah, to a viewer that's just, you know, in there for 15, 20 minutes or so. You know, like a scattering of dust on a book that obscures the title of the book to a degree that I'm happy with, you know? So it's like...
That was something that happened in the dock, wasn't it? That there was, you brought... The dock is quite a domestic type of space, you know, and you brought dust in, didn't you?
Yeah.
So we're in this world where...
So yeah, I have a bag of dust that Kevin swept up, or one of Kevin's assistants swept up like 7 or 8 years ago. It was Benjamin, was it? So I call it dust, but you know, it's bone fragments, it's torn bits of paper, it's sawdust, it's, you know,
it's cosmic.
lint.
It's cosmic detritus.
Yeah,
it's what's left over.
Probably the most cosmic element of the exhibition. Yeah.
Have we time for another question? From anywhere?
I'm trying to ask a question, if that's okay. Wish me luck. There's been there's improvisation everywhere, and there's been a lot of mention of it as well. And then what I want to kind of ask you about is if everything is made within that day or it's gone, then there's the idea of you producing vast amounts of stuff. How does that impact on like the value of any given work? There's an opposite approach to making a film for a year or many years, and slowly sitting with the footage and editing it, and re-editing it, and or
Yeah.
chipping away at marble for many months on one thing, but you're about producing huge amounts, and then does that sit well with you? Is that why you do it that way? So, you know what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, so I think like there's very like, you know, everybody I think has a natural way of working. And for me, that's always been a natural way of working. But it's interesting that you're talking about this idea of the filmmaker who's, you know, working on footage or collecting footage, filming footage over years. And the same for many artists. But I think like, so I say things like paintings have to be finished, but then I may not necessarily view a painting as just a singular piece necessarily. So it's always in there as part of the practice to be reused perhaps in a different way. So there's a lot of recycling that goes on in my practice, mostly with objects or previous installation works that then get amalgamated into another installation work and then reshown again. So for a moment they're finished and they're done with, but then a couple of years down the line, elements of that may be reused again, or the use of those elements and objects or paintings then is subtly changed by the environment or the work that they're then placed within, I suppose. But going back to the original thing about it, the majority of it is that it does just sit well with me that that's the way I work, is that I try and work quickly and just try and get things finished.
Has that always been the way, or is that sort of a consequence of the practical considerations of day-to-day life?
No, it's always been the way.
Okay.
Yeah. It's, I don't know, it's something to do with like, I don't know, it's like a personal anxiety or something. You know? It's, yeah, it's more for my well-being, you know,
Okay.
that I have to get something finished,
Yeah.
you know.
And done.
But it works out, you know, you could spend like the whole, you know, 4 or 5 hours in the morning trying to do something and it's crap. And I just usually would discard that. And then I
Take
could be in
parts
the
of it away.
studio for like an hour and get something finished, or an hour and a half or something, have something done, you know? It's just very unpredictable.
It's like the objects in the installations. It's like the elements of the paintings that they're never stable, are they? Really, they're not. They're there to come and go.
Yeah.
Which is a sort of which leads to an ongoingness, which leads to a sort of rejection of boundary, or a sort of an avoidance of finality.
Yeah.
So there's an ongoingness to it.
Yeah. Like I always, yeah. I
So
guess there's always that question for painters, like, when do you know it's finished kind of thing. But like for me, it's that I always kind of think something's finished, but then it gets
Opens up again.
regurgitated at something else, you know? Yeah, like it's kind of ongoing cycle.
Any more questions? Joe?
And you actually kind of just touched on it. I love the image of the dark room, which is the process of, you know, translating something from the brain into the paper without really understanding all the chemicals and all that are in it. But I was just wondering, when you come to the end of the work that you're not discarding, does that mean it's just less frustrated with the outcome, or is it satisfaction?
It's just satisfaction. But sometimes you could, you know, like for this painting, for instance, over here, that had a painting underneath it that I was dissatisfied with, that then got, you know, spray painted over completely. And then it was painted, and I was totally unsatisfied with that painting, but I just let it sit there in the studio. And it's only when you come to doing a show like this that you come around to realizing that, you know, not every painting it's part of a bigger composition when it's in a show, you know? So it perhaps complements other paintings, and that's its strength. Whereas on its own, for me personally, I wasn't completely satisfied with it, but here it has its role, like, you know.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because you said you didn't necessarily use sort of concrete references,
Mm-hmm.
but then with the figure elements and things, it sort of remains sort of symbolic or like ideographic. Or I think there's something about the, and not just or in general, the visualizing something about the index carriages. Do you know what I mean?
Is there a particular,
Well, just older there are certain kind of figure elements too.
yeah, like,
I'm wondering just about the relationship to them as they're not sort of
yeah,
concrete or trying to anything, or
I
how
guess,
they were like in terms of language.
yeah, I guess in the way that you're talking about it, I think that there's just kind of like a bank or a library of particular motifs or symbols that recur, you know, that kind of place themselves in the painting while I'm making it. You know, so I guess there's a kind of automism to it in a way, in some ways, you know, or there's an intuitive nature to the way that I paint, in that a space may open up where a particular structure or shape or symbol will fit, you know. I mean, there are instances in this show where there are a couple of things that are painted directly from sources, but it's in the wider practice of my work, it's not that common. So like there's a painting up here that has like Shiva in it, which is painted from a picture of a statue. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yes, I didn't know. That's what
Yeah.
would that relate also, like, I don't know, the way you use like visual language more generally, or like certain like current patterns, or certain, I don't know.
Yeah. I think
motifs in a way, but like not just in terms of symbols, in terms of like the overall shape or visual language that they're drawing in different images.
yeah, I think it is just part of that kind of like, you know, it's a bank of things that I draw on constantly, you know?
There's a lot of birthday cakes,
Yeah.
Christmas trees, flowers.
Yeah. Christmas trees, birthday cakes.
There was a
Scarecrows.
more esoteric type of imagery. Well, I don't know. I remember the show in the Complex that you did with people like Glenn. It was like a group show.
Oh yeah, Glenn, Lillian and Sybil.
So you would there was a sort of body of imagery that I thought that was quite immediate but esoteric at the same time. You know, sort of hieroglyphic. There's a sort of mystery.
Yeah.
Or there was then, and you know, perhaps you've moved away from that body, but there was a lot of work with that type of feeling to it, that they were, you know, sort of deliberately set up to be deciphered, but you know, there was no real or necessary answer.
I think some of that is still retained in some of these works.
Where can we see that? Do you
I would
think?
say like the small kind of slightly bowed painting over there is perhaps indecipherable really. Beyond its title.
What's it's
That one's called Whirlwind.
Whirlwind.
Whirlwind, so it's, yeah, I mean, it's a whirlwind of imagery.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
A whirlwind of swirls and colours.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have we time for one more? Somewhere, a question? No? Thanks very much, Richard.
Thanks, John.
It was great.
And thanks everybody for coming.
The show runs until the 25th of November, which is what, 2 weeks? Another 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Tell everybody, bring everybody into the show. Thanks to Gallery Weekend for I suppose, you know, putting out the word and drawing attention to the work that Kevin and all the gang do, and all of the rest of the spaces in town. There is a catalogue that Richard has beautifully made with the designer. Who's the designer on it?
First 47.
For Alex.
Alex Singh.
Alex Singh this is a really wonderful publication. There's a conversation. There's a text by Porrick Moore. There's a conversation.
There's a text by Jonathan Donahue as well.
And there's a conversation with Zully Adler, who's an American curator and critic, and might provide more insight than we managed today. But thank you very much for coming, everyone. It was great to see everyone.